Welcome to the Take a Breather podcast with Eric Almeida and Stacy Every. We are certified emotional freedom technique practitioners, and on this podcast, we discuss how EFT can improve your mental and physical health by bringing real healing to body and mind. We have lots of different practitioners visit us on the show to tell us about their healing methods and how they can facilitate deep healing. And today, I'd like to introduce Fritha Pengelly, owner of the Center for Feldenkrais and Movement Arts. She's based in Northampton, Massachusetts. She's a Feldenkrais and an EFT practitioner. And welcome to our podcast, Fritha.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
It's great having you here. We've known Fritha for a long time, and I've known a bit about Feldenkrais for a while now, but I'm excited to have you here to talk about it in more detail and how you've integrated EFT in with your practice. So it's going to find out more about that.
Great.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, so Fritha, so I'll be perfectly frank, I had never heard of Feldenkrais until I met you. So if you could, for our listeners, just give us a breakdown of what is it? How does it work and all that fun stuff?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's funny when you run into people, they've heard of it or they haven't heard of it. Most of the time they haven't heard of it. So the Feldenkrais method, the sort of bigger name for it is the Feldenkrais method of somatic education. And it was created by a man named Moshe Feldenkrais, who was a physicist, a judo master, very long and interesting sort of life and career. But that's where the name comes from. It comes from his name. And it's a somatic practice. So for those people that know somatic practice, soma is of the body, of the living body. And so the practice is really learning about ourselves, learning about myself through my own experience. So different from, a third person outside of me saying, this is what's going on in your shoulder, and this is what you need to do to, change it or fix it. As a Feldenkrais practitioner, my job or my role is to create an environment in which someone can learn something from their own experience. So they can learn, oh yeah, I can feel in myself, my right shoulder is a little bit more forward than my left, and how that might be contributing to a whole pattern throughout the whole self, throughout the whole body. So we're really, it's not that we don't have expertise or see something or try to facilitate someone feeling maybe something in particular that I'm seeing, but the idea is for them to really feel it within themselves and be able to change it from their own experience. And there's sort of two aspects to the work. One is the private sessions, which we call functional integration, where I would work with somebody hands-on using my own sort of experience in my own body to help someone feel something in their bodies that they might not be able to feel otherwise. And then the classes are a group setting where I teach a specific lesson that everyone sort of brings their own questions and their own issues or, their shoulder pain, their back pain, whatever it is, into the lesson to discover something through the movements. So those are sort of the two aspects. When I teach workshops, it's really sort of like a class situation and working with the group, working with specific lessons. Feldenkrais created over 1,000 lessons. So each lesson is a different, unique lesson. For the individuals, it would be a specific lesson designed for them in the moment. The classes are really a specific lesson that's based on function. It might be rolling, it might be reaching, it might be turning, it might be sitting. And the lessons are in all different configurations. We could be lying. A lot of lessons are lying down. I can talk more about that, why that is. Or it could be on hands and knees, it could be sitting, it could be lying on the side. So it just sort of depends on the function, and it keeps the brain interested, because Feldenkrais really understood when we're curious, we're more likely to engage, right? You can imagine sitting in school or something where the lesson's just not interesting. Your brain doesn't stay necessarily engaged in the learning process. So when you're sort of curious about something or invited to be curious about something, then it allows the brain to sort of be engaged in a different way. So that's it in a nutshell, and feel free to ask clarifying questions if I missed some pieces.
Yeah, I have a question right off the bat. So the practice, it's funny how holistic medicine, there's this common themes in every single modality, and reforging the mind-body connection is such a fundamental piece for every single modality I've been in touch with in the alternative world. And I'm wondering if Feldenkrais, so knowing that for so many people, for so many years, they've been encouraged to live in their heads and not feel their bodies, how, if Feldenkrais, I assume, is aware of that issue when it comes to the healing process, and if Feldenkrais has a particular, like, I don't know, techniques or recommendations for people to help them feel, because I know from my own experience with Feldenkrais, it can be a very subtle, you're looking for very subtle sensations in the body. And so if you have someone coming to you and you know, and they're having a hip issue or whatever, and you need them to be able to feel into their body, how can you encourage? Do you have a hard time? Is it hard to do that? Do you have other ways to help people with that process, like relearning how to feel their bodies?
Yeah, it's such a great question. Feldenkrais, he has an article called Mind and Body, and his belief was that they are not, it's even more than that they're connected, that they are the same thing. So he said, I'm not after flexible bodies, I'm after flexible minds. It's really about, and that's what the whole practice is about, is learning, is engaging the neuromuscular, the nervous system in learning. It's not about, oh, this muscle's weak and this muscle's strong, okay, let's strengthen this. It's not about that sort of taking things apart, which is sort of, can be sort of seen as a more of a mind, sort of trying to understand or analyze something, versus sort of how does this whole thing function well or not well. So, and it is a practice. It is harder for some people. Some people just sort of naturally sort of go, oh yeah, this is, they just sort of, the world sort of opens up to them. Other people, it takes more time to sort of come back into the body. And we all are different, right? Some people just naturally are more sort of analytical and in their minds, and some people are more naturally in their bodies. So I try to invite patience and practice. And as a practitioner, through a class or through a private lesson, I'm always asking questions. So I'm inviting people to sense particular parts of themselves. So as you do that movement, what do you sense in your ribs? What do you sense in your relationship to the ground? I'm constantly inviting them to attend to themselves through the lesson in different places. And so that gets easier, I think, the more you practice it. And Feldenkrais also talked about the self-image, right? This sort of, we have an image of ourselves. And he famously said, we act in accordance with our self-image. And there's parts of ourselves that are really clear to us, right? There's parts of ourselves that we know really well, and other parts of ourselves that we don't use or we're not familiar with. And so we're in that process of learning, expanding our sense of ourselves, or expanding our sense of possibility through attending to places that maybe are not so clear. So does that answer your question?
It does. And now I have more. Unless Eric,
no.
I don't want to. Okay.
Run with it, Stacy. Run with it.
Well, that piece has always been fascinating to me. I don't know if the two of you have seen the Amy Cuddy TED Talk. She's a social scientist, and she talks about, she studied how body position influences our emotional states. Mm-hmm. So and she talks about power poses that if
right.
Yeah. And so when you, like, say 2 minutes a day, you spend, like, one of the power poses she calls the Wonder Woman pose, with your hands on your hips, and that it changes your brain chemistry to do this. It actually changes your hormones, and you feel more confidence and more grounded when you take on these poses. So it changes your emotional state, and that in fact the body affects the mind and the mind affects the body. So if you hunch, even if it's because of your work, you feel depressed because that's a depressed shape. Then your body associates that shape with depression. So I'm wondering, the self-image thing I find fascinating in your work. If people find they have a different sense of if they in fact have a different sense of themselves because they're moving in a more fluid, balanced way and accessing parts of their body they haven't accessed before, and just what you've seen in that connection between the self-image and the physical changes people see in their bodies, and how it changes their perceptions of themselves and their emotions, and how they're able to handle situations. I'm just wondering if you've seen those kinds of patterns.
Yeah, it's true. I noticed that a lot. If people. I maybe more in a private session because there's more specific conversation, after a session or during a session, than a class situation might not invite as much of that. But seeing someone come in to a session with a very slumped posture and back, coming for back pain, and then at the end of the session, just like a whole different, literally, it looks like a whole different person. Like maybe aged, matured and aged, and looks more graceful and less sort of. It's astounding that it's so true that how someone feels about themselves affects their posture, and vice versa. So that we can work from a perspective of like, how do I create new possibilities in myself, in my movement possibilities, and how the different ways I can be in my body, and how that can influence what I can see is possible for me in my life. And so Feldenkrais was very much, that was what he was really interested in. People, what he cared about was people living their unavowed dreams, like shedding all the sort of this. He talked about that a lot in all of his books, on his trainings, that because we have such a long period of dependence as humans, if you think about most animals, when they're born, they know how to walk already. They just have to sort of, build up the strength, whereas we take a long time to learn how to crawl and how to walk. And, we sort of have this long period where we're dependent on the adults in our lives. And that environment can really influence how we organize ourselves in relationship to the world and into our environment. And so he was really interested in people being able to sort of find themselves, find their own possibilities, their own potential. He talked about, the idea that we all can be genius if we don't get in our own way, if we don't have these ways that we sort of act compulsively, which is very sort of a relationship to EFT, really, right? The sort of the habitual ways that we behave that sort of get in the way of us actually moving forward or doing something we want to do, or that kind of thing. So he has his book, The Potent Self, is sort of about that sort of spontaneity versus compulsion. He really was interested in people being able to be spontaneous in the moment, right? To be able to respond like you would talk about in EFT, right? I can respond in the moment based on what's happening right now. How do I need to respond appropriately versus bringing my past with me and reacting to the situation based on something from my past. So, yeah.
I got to say, as a massage therapist, your information about movement patterns has informed my work tremendously. And I've tried to give that information as much as possible. So often people come to me and say, I have a bad back and all my family has a bad back. It's genetic. It runs in the family. And,
Right.
and I know, why don't you tell your answer to that rather than me, is that the whole movement pattern isn't necessarily in the genes. It's a hampered movement pattern that we learn from our family members.
Right. I have a little quote I want to read from, so Feldenkrais's book, Awareness Through Movement. He's talking about, there's 4 components in every action: moving, thinking, feeling, and sensing. And that they're all, like, each action has that. And he talks about, where is it? Oh, in order to feel angry or happy, a man must be in a certain posture and in some kind of relationship to another being or object. So, and he goes on to say, that is, he must also move, sense, and think. But this idea that you're talking about, that you're brought to our attention, right, is that when I have a feeling, an emotion, there's a particular body pattern that's connected to that, that's related to that.
Yeah, it's so fascinating because I feel like we forget, the body component of all of this kind of work so much that we will default so much to the mental side of it. Because to give a practical example, like, I'm 5'8", my husband's 5'9", but so he's a little, a sliver taller than me, but there are times where if he's not in a good mood and like he's compressed upon himself, I become taller than him. And there are those times where I notice that and I'm like, what? Wait, I'm like, I didn't grow. Like what happened? And so it's so fascinating that this practice is taking it from the body orientation, going it down that angle compared to the other way around of always attacking, oh, it's a mental issue. And like you were saying that, the creator of Feldenkrais sees no distinction, which I think is so unique as a form of wellness, because so many of them kind of pick one or the other. They don't necessarily keep them together.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very, very, it's fascinating. I can't think of another modality that really doesn't remove the two from each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's hard to think of it too. Culturally, I've been so trained in the separation. It's actually hard to think of it as one system. And I feel like once we all do think of it as one system, the possibilities of how to interact with our own bodies and with the world around us, once we know it's all one thing and there's a constant consciousness of the whole system, how that's going to shift just, well, everything, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really true. I mean, I feel that way about EFT, and maybe you all have, be curious to hear what you think about that. That we're sort of trying, it's the practice of really sort of trusting in the body and trusting what the body's saying and what's there in the body. It's not just sort of, looping through just the talking part of it, but it's really bringing the two together.
Yeah, I think one of the benefits of EFT is that the gateway is usually the talking, which people get. Right, we'll talk.
Right.
I'm having this issue. Let's talk about it for a minute and explain it, and and then we're talking on the points. And actually, I know that with massage, and I imagine with Feldenkrais too, when people don't have a good body sense, tapping and using the words helps gently kind of reactivate the body sense, because it's safer, right? Okay, I understand talking, this whole body thing, I don't know how it works or if it's going to be useful, and I'm kind of nervous about what's going to happen. But if you you can sort of gently transition people through into more mind body sensation, but starting off with the mind.
Yeah. And one thing I'll certainly say when it comes to EFT is that from my perspective, compared to the two of you, I feel like you guys have an advantage because you guys have so much experience working with the body that I myself, I don't bring that into my practice. Like I don't have that experience. I'm not a Feldenkrais practitioner. I'm not a massage therapist either. And it's just, so for me, there are certainly many times in my practice, even whether I'm the client or I'm the practitioner, where I have to always kind of, the tapping's always there, but sometimes I have to remember like the power of really engaging again with, what are you feeling in your body in this moment? Like, because sometimes they might not have a thought, they might not have an emotion, but they might be like, oh, I'm feeling tension, I'm feeling tight, I'm feeling nauseous, I'm feeling pain, I'm feeling this. And so it's that third avenue of getting into that kind of healing that doesn't come to mind as quickly for me, just coming from more, having a little bit more of experience on the psychology front from my undergrad degree and stuff like that, of just kind of really sticking with it being so severely cognitive. So in a way, I'm a little bit more jealous of the two of you having being a little bit more in tune with people's bodies and all of that. So
We all have our own skills, our own sort of pieces that we bring to it. You bring your life experience, which brings a whole bunch of knowledge and all of that too. So
no, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's one thing I value so much about EFT is it's so flexible that each of us in our three wildly different approaches and modalities can use it, and it's going to be effective for our clients. It's fabulous.
Yeah.
So an interesting question for you, Fritha. what is your cue to incorporate the EFT into the work? So if you have the client come in and they came in for the Feldenkrais session, if it was a one-to-one session, what is the cue for you to kind of pull the EFT tool out of the toolkit kind of thing?
That's a great question. I think there's different sort of cues. One might be someone who keeps coming back. For example, what I mentioned before, where they come in with this posture and they leave with this posture. The next week they come back with this posture, and then so there's this constant, like every time they come back, they've sunk back into something because something is keeping them there, and the modality of the movement is helpful, and there's progress happening, but it's not quite getting to the deeper roots of what's going on. That would be one time I might sort of say, hey, would you be interested in or open to trying this other modality? And they may or may not be. Sometimes people come in and they're not sure, what should I do? So we might try one and then try the other. And then maybe we have the opportunity to mix them. If I'm working with somebody in a private session and they have, an emotional reaction or a memory or something, we can just start tapping because it's right there. So that's another sort of way. I also have a new client who is, reminds me of other people too, where they come in and the pain is always changing, right? It's like, right now it's in my foot here, and then the next week it's in a different part of the foot, and now it's over here. It's sort of bouncing around, right? It sort of gives me a cue that maybe it's not necessarily biomechanical and the way the stresses are moving, the forces are moving through the skeleton. That might be sort of an emotional piece to it that's really sort of creating the discomfort and the pain. That's a really good clue for me that there might be something. And then I would definitely encourage someone to try the EFT. Or if they tell me something in their intake form that gives me a clue of they have some kind of trauma in their background, that they might be helped by sort of starting with EFT or combining the two. Those are some different clues that sort of give me an idea. If they came in with a sprained ankle, excuse me, I would probably start with Feldenkrais. Back pain can be tricky because it could be a sprained ankle from 20 years ago, or it could be the emotional pieces that we've been talking about. There's feeling it out. I mean, I think one of the things as practitioners we're sort of taught in our training, and it's really sort of how we engage with the person, is we're meeting the whole person where they are. So they come to me and it's like, what's the whole picture, right? We try to sort of see what their environmental context is, their history, what's happening right now in the moment. All those pieces are really important to think about.
So I'm not sure if you'll have an answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. We've talked already about how like the being hunched over, kind of closing oneself in, could be an indicator of would probably be something in the depression category. Is there other things that you've noticed, other physical movements or actions that you've noticed tend to be connected to a specific mental component when you've incorporated the EFT? Like, does one, like, similar to like how being hunched over could be leaning into depression? Have you noticed anything else, that kind of connection, and if not, it's okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure specifically. I mean, I know like the thing that comes to mind is people's feet, right? The Feldenkrais talked about sort of our ability to stand on our own 2 feet, like literally, and also like, what does that mean for us in our lives? Like, I have the independence, I have the confidence to stand on my own 2 feet. And what is that? And that's also related to me really being able to stand on 2 feet, right? If I maybe stand on one, or I can't really find myself, there might be something related to the feet that sometimes might give me some information about, like, why is that? Is there something sort of functional happening in the foot? People have had all kinds of, little injuries or things in their feet or ankles. But there might also be something that has to do with not really knowing how to like really be in their true power or strength. That I might sort of look there too.
Interesting.
That makes so much sense. And I often think that there's so many. I don't know if Carolyn Mace is a medical intuitive who often will, uh, in her books, often relates. There's very often patterns between physical conditions and emotional ones, like very specific lines you
Mm-hmm.
can draw between the two. And I was also thinking about, um, for me, uh, my feet were always extremely tight, and I was also very disassociated and had a hard time being in the moment. Like I tended to be like I was very ungrounded, and my feet were in fact like tight and not very
Mm-hmm.
well settled on the ground. And as I did more acupuncture and therapies of various kinds, my feet used to be horribly ticklish. And in fact, a tight muscle is a ticklish muscle very often. My feet are no longer ticklish. I didn't do any physical it's not like I did stretches or did new kinds of exercises. I did nothing like that, and yet all the inner work I've done, my feet are softer and I'm more settled on the ground. So it's just another one of
That's so
those.
cool.
It's
That's so
fascinating.
interesting.
It is. It is. Yeah. Yeah.
Huh. I had no idea.
Yeah. Yeah. I've also, um, uh, again, more information about me, about Stacy. My voice, I had a terrible singing voice when I was a kid, like terribly limited range and couldn't carry a tune at all. And my voice has gotten stronger. Like again, it's kind of an obvious, an
Mm-hmm.
obvious
Mm-hmm.
metaphor.
Hmm.
Doing the inner work and getting more settled in who I am and what I want and speaking up for myself and all of that. And suddenly I can sing in a way I've never been able to in my entire life. So it's often just the side effects of our work can be really interesting.
Yeah.
The body
I hear you
responses are
there.
so the emotional work and resulting in the body responses that are just really fascinating.
But for each person, whatever comes out of, the work, the EFT or the Feldenkrais lesson is going to be really unique based on what the person, how they're organized and what they need to learn or what their, possibilities are. I have a friend who I went through my training with who there's one specific lesson that she said she learned how to sing after the lesson. And not that everybody was going to learn how to sing from that lesson. It's just that she learned something really specific from that lesson and all of a sudden she could sing. So
Yes.
it
That's
is just
crazy.
really cool how that can happen.
Yes.
For sure.
So interesting.
So, so in regards to Feldenkrais, would would it be fair to compare it to physical therapy? Is it completely different from physical therapy? Like for
Is it,
someone for like
I can see it being a Venn diagram, right? If there being some kind of overlap between. Sorry, what were you gonna say, Eric?
oh, I was just gonna say like how would what would be that one liner to describe Feldenkrais to someone else, like the elevator pitch of because people know what physical therapy is. It's an easy thing for people to absorb. So like I guess, you know, is it comparable? Is it not comparable? Like how does that work,
Mm-hmm.
Fritha?
It's a great question. And I think it could be seen as a kind of physical therapy. It's not obviously, I don't have a PT license or anything like that. And there's so many different kinds of physical therapy. I don't know, you may have experienced I've worked with different physical therapists and there's just really different techniques. Some are very hands-on, some are really about exercises. So, it's hard. I guess it feels hard to compare necessarily, but it is a way to help somebody move through an injury or a difficulty. And I guess what I would say is Feldenkrais practitioners are really good at movement, understanding movement, being able to observe somebody's patterns and movement and understand how to help them improve whatever they're already doing, improve the function, which tends to, if there's a shoulder pain that's like not necessarily resultant of a specific injury or sort of like all of a sudden my shoulder is just hurting and now it's hurting, there's not necessarily an underlying biomechanical physical issue, but it's like some way they're not supporting the arm in such a way that it can move easily and freely, so that we're sort of looking at functionally how can we help the arm move with more ease and more lightness because it's really connected into the ribs and the spine, and it's not about like, okay, of course it is related to like specifically what's happening in the joint, but we're really looking at how is the whole thing. How are my feet not supporting my arm? Like, why am I having shoulder pain because I don't know where my feet are on the ground, right? So we're really looking at movement, function. Not that physical therapists aren't. Like I said, I think from my experience, there's so many different ways that people work. But the thing I would say is that we're really good at movement, understanding function and movement.
Because I remember when I had, oh, sorry, Stacey.
No, go for it.
I remember when I had my session with you, when my shoulder was bothering me, that one of the things that you were able to bring awareness to me was when I was doing, I forget what this particular exercise is, when you're like just doing like a deadlift, I guess, in front of you, where I was putting all of the strain into my upper shoulder and I wasn't utilizing my shoulder blade at all. And that was something that you were able to kind of bring that awareness to me of being like, you're ignoring all of this strength in your back. And it's like, and that's why you're hurting your shoulder so easily. And I was just like, oh. And like when you were showing me like how to lift my arm up with no weight and just be like, you need to use your everything, use your whole back. It's spreading out the strain through the back, through the, through the ribs, through the skeleton, and into my feet. And I was like, oh, I'm like, I didn't know I was just literally just using one specific region only and ignoring everything else. And so like, I guess, and tell me if this sounds wrong, but like Feldenkrais can be a great way if someone has learned a movement in their own body that isn't serving them to relearn how to do it in a way that is meant to be done for their body. Does that sound right to you?
It's exactly right. That's how I would say it. Yep. Because we've all either, through injury and compensation or just through that long dependence period, we developed a habit that just, it served us then, just like with EFT, right? Those habits served us then, but now they're not.
Yes.
How do I improve that and make it better so that it can be useful for me now? Yeah.
So Feldenkrais is actually a perfect therapy I see a lot of people who they have an injury or they have a surgery, and then they develop compensation patterns because they're favoring the leg, they're favoring the foot, the shoulder, and they go to PT, which might take care of some. And so often PT is so much more localized in its thinking. I mean, better physical therapists, I think more physical therapists are getting on board with the idea that if someone's shoulder is hurting, you can't ignore their neck and back. At least you should. At least you shouldn't.
You would hope.
It's not a great plan to ignore the neck and back, but still, often if the injury was catastrophic enough, or in any kind of surgery, in my experience, really jazzes up the nervous system, that your therapy would be the perfect thing to go to next to reintegrate the body and reintegrate the injured portion back into the whole.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it reminds me of a client I came once, and he had like a back spasm or something, was like really, like his back went out. And I worked a lot with his feet, and he was like, oh yeah, he'd injured something in his foot like years ago. So I guess I should have done that physical therapy. he hadn't done the things so he was still compensating. And it also makes me think of a client I worked with years ago who had, I think, fallen and broken her wrist. She was in a cast. So she came in her cast, and I just was able to work. Her fingers were, sticking out of the cast. So I was able to work with her fingers and also, with the shoulder and neck. And the result was she felt like a warmth, like I think it got blood flow, it was important to the healing.
Oh, wow.
Even though she couldn't move that yet or really integrate it yet, just having the sort of sensation that her fingers were still there, starting to remind the nervous system that her hand is still a part of her, I guess, maybe.
Yeah. That's so fascinating that you were able to reverse the atrophy of the fact that her hand was unusable. That's so interesting. Huh.
And so brilliant. I'm thinking how the joy of Feldenkrais is it's so gentle, like deceptively gentle. And so often, the doctors will say, well, yes, eventually go to the massage therapist. Eventually you'll start PT. But to have the cast on still and be able to go to Feldenkrais to accelerate the healing process. If you get blood
Mhm.
through there, the healing is going to be faster, and then keep the body from getting locked in some really painful pattern that's going to cause problems in the 6 to 8 weeks they may have a cast on. Like it's
Right.
a brilliant that they can still see you for treatment,
Yeah.
even when they're still casted or in a sling or whatever.
Yeah. Super fun. Yeah.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Hmm. Are there certain injuries you tend to see most often in your practice? The kind of ailments people tend to come to you for?
I've seen a lot of people with like plantar fasciitis, sort of foot, discomfort, um, back pain. I've had a few people with who've had hip replacements, so a similar thing where they had a pretty strong compensation pattern and then they had a hip replacement and the pain is gone, but there's still this old pattern and the fear of the new, trusting the new hip. And also, and sometimes with these people, I work in conjunction with massage or whatever, but just to get into the tissue, the actual sort of scar tissue and stuff like that. Um, but also sort of reminding people, their nervous systems, oh yeah, where is my hip joint? Because it's metal, right? Like where is it? Where does it live? And how does it move? And all those kinds
Oh,
of things. So I've worked
in
with a few people with hip replacements.
in
Um,
does that change? I hadn't even thought of that. If people having metal or plastic parts in their bodies, if that alters their body sense in some way or interferes with it, or there's some kind of physical. I can see there being some kind of physical, like a body system discomfort about their body because they have this foreign thing. I don't know. Is that something you've seen? I was
well, I think
curious.
joints have proprioceptors in them, right? So they've lost some way of
Oh,
getting information
oh, of
about
course.
where they are in space in that part of themselves.
Oh, right.
Um,
Oh, interesting.
and movement, I think, can help us know where we are. Help can orient us, right? So helping them trust and move and stand on that leg, that kind of thing, can really um, help them. And it takes a lot. It takes time, and I don't know if and people can ever really feel the same, surety about that joint that they had with their own bones. But I think it can help improve their ability to know where they are.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Did
So
you
what would
have
you
any other questions, Stace?
I'm I'm wondering I actually wonder oh yeah, I did have a question. One thing you mentioned before too about integrating EFT into your practice. I'm a little jealous because my clients are laying on tables and it's much harder to start tapping. It doesn't necessarily make sense for them to tap in the moment, whereas you totally can do that. I'm um I'm curious. One thing I've run across over and over again that I've been encouraging people to do now that I know more about EFT and is the surgery accident issue that
Hmm.
the so often people's bodies remember the injury. They remember car accidents are particularly catastrophic to the nervous system, where they often their entire body is slightly locked in this bracing pattern, and trying to figure out how to and an EFT seems like a really good choice for for tapping away that the trauma from the actual accident or the trauma from being cut from surgery or the trauma of the anesthesia. There's all these places that people don't realize just how much the body hates that experience and how
Mm-hmm.
deeply anxious it makes the body. And I say the body is a separate thing because in this case, like there is, and as we navigate the mind body connection, I would love to one day feel as completely integrated where my mind is always aware of my body and vice versa, but I know I'm not there yet. And I assume most people aren't either.
Yeah.
So just feeling into that, being aware that the body's having its own experience and that EFT is a way to relax the muscles from the body's trauma experience of the accident or the surgery. And it's something I haven't figured out though how to integrate into my practice yet, other than okay, let's set aside some time after the session and tap on the accident itself. I was wondering if you'd had any experience with a kind of like a locked body that if you've used EFT, or if Feldenkrais has a way to unlock that sort of systemic bracing pattern of the anxiety pattern, the shoulders up and it's like the body, the fascia, the tissue on the outside of our body becomes like armor, we're like a knight on the horse with the whole body in this clenched pattern.
Yeah, the way the trauma gets stuck in the body, right? I mean, that idea that we have to deal with the trauma in the body because that's where it got stuck, right? So that you're actually giving me a really great idea to do some tapping, with anybody who's had a surgery or an accident. Like maybe we start with tapping to get their nervous system ready. And the other thing is it's about safety, right? The body feeling like it can actually be in the present moment and feel safe. And so I think, especially in a private session where I can use my hands to help someone feel that you're right here, you're safe, and that can help someone's nervous system start to, and most people in a class or a private lesson, their nervous system just really, unless they've got something else going on. I mean, I can't say that always happens for every person, but generally people get really relaxed and their nervous systems, we get a little bit cooled down, right? That we sort of switch into a different gear in our nervous system just because it's a sense of safety, I think, right? That we're creating and providing for somebody's nervous system to go, oh, okay, I don't have to stay like this because I, right here, right now, I'm okay.
Yes, it makes sense that the body is the joy of the body is it's always looking for ways to heal, right? Like our natural predilection is to heal and to take opportunities where we can, and that there's more than one way to do that. EFT is one, but that just with Feldenkrais, just reminding the body that it's safe and helping the body remember what safety literally feels like.
Exactly.
Is it so much about finding that place again? It's once you've been there, you'll know once you've been there once, you can get back there again. So in a class with you, this is what relaxation feels like. This is what safety and peace feels like. So many people say to me, okay, I know I should meditate. I know I should, okay, well,
I've been so guilty of that.
Right. But one reason
who hasn't,
and people tend to get really in our it's all on you mentality, and here in America, people blame themselves for not being able to get to that place of relaxation when they haven't visited that place in a really long time, because their environments, the culture have been keeping us in sympathetic, active, goal-oriented, switched on nervous system, and that classes like yours it's a training, right? It's a gently retraining the body to relax, and that people should seek you out all the time so after seeing you first for a series, and then meditation, I bet would be doable for those folks, because they actually know what it should feel like, and they can get themselves back there on their own again once you've shown them the way the first time.
Right. And that sort of what we know from polyvagal theory, right? That there's the ventral vagal system, which is about social engagement, right? So that social engagement, that piece is so important for healing, feeling safe and having the connection.
So in fact, it's actually much easier to relax in a safe group of people than it is to meditate by yourself in your house, is what you're saying.
As I understand it, that there has to be that piece, which is why, we can practice EFT on our own, we can practice Feldenkrais on our own, it's really helpful. And the piece of like having somebody there who's listening, who's supporting, who's creating the container, creating the safety, and engaging, with you. I think what you're saying is you practice it, and then it's easier to do on your own.
But no, I totally agree with you in that regard, that yes, Feldenkrais can be done alone. Yes, EFT can be done alone. But at least in my personal experience, it's not comparable compared to doing it with someone else.
I've had the same experience.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Not to discourage that,
Right,
So you
right.
still should
Yeah.
do it on your
Oh,
own.
absolutely.
I
But
still do it on my
it's-
own every day, but yeah.
Yes, yeah, but it's
We're wired to be with other people. There's
yeah.
in massage therapy training, there's the thing called well, I'm sure other people work with it too. The idea of entrainment. I assume that's a word that you use also in your modality, Fritha, maybe, that where it's so everything we know about babies and we think, oh, that's just what babies do.
Mhm.
It's all true for adults as well. When we hold our babies and we rock them, which they love, and so do we, and then we breathe slowly and deeply, they mirror us. That's
Mhm.
they are entrained to our breathing pattern. Their
Mhm.
heartbeats slow, like their whole bodies get into this calmness because it matches the mother or the father. And so we do the same thing if we're in the room with a centered, loving, breathing slowly, heartbeat, resting adult who we trust. We
Yeah.
entrain ourselves to them as well.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, one reason why it works so well, and not even just in a group, but with a person or people who are themselves able to be in that parasympathetic rest and digest meditative space.
Yeah. Yeah, that attunement that happens. I mean, that's how babies learn how to self-regulate, is by someone else regulating themselves and helping them learn that. So we all got that in less or more ways, right? Some of us got plenty of that, some of us didn't get any of it, right? So it's we need help regulating and learning how to regulate our nervous systems, and wherever we are in that, you know, relationship to ourselves, the sometimes we need more help with that.
And the joy that another cultural perception that I'd like to be just turned on its head is the idea that, like, once we're 25, we're done with that. Like, we can't change our nervous systems, that we're sort of, there's this fixedness about us that is only, we're way more open and able to change and grow and be flexible in our environments when we're little, but that all goes away at some point. We become
Right.
like, and it's just not so. We
Right.
always, the flexibility, we are always adaptable. We are always flexible. It might be
Yes.
different, but the possibility is always there.
Absolutely. And that's what Feldenkrais understood before we had the science to show us what neuroplasticity is. He understood that. We have to learn how to do everything, and we have to have that skill throughout our lifetime. So we have the ability to make every experience that we have creates a new pattern in our brains. And the more we practice those new things, the faster they get, more we develop a skill. And we just have that, he really felt that we do not use our full capacity of what we have in our brains to use. And so the more we can experience novel situations and learn, the more we expand our capacities as humans.
No, for sure. And it's embracing that mentality of, like you were saying, of not only can we learn new things, both physically and mentally and emotionally, but that the reverse is also true. We can unlearn things that no longer serve us physically, mentally, and emotionally. That the neuroplasticity goes both ways, that you can dismantle an old system, or you can dismantle a way that you're walking or moving or carrying something, and then relearn, be like, oh, this is just better for me, or I don't need to be thinking this way, or my emotional response to this action I don't need that anymore. It was an old thing I learned, and now I can unlearn it and learn something new.
Yeah.
No, it's so true. For sure. You have anything else, Stace?
I could talk all day, but I think I'm good for right now. Unless you have anything else.
It's very fun to talk with both of you.
Ditto.
Same. I could talk about this stuff all day. I love it. It's just I find it just so fascinating, and I'm so thrilled that there's more and more information and practitioners who are working with just going back to the body. Everything EFT. It's I see the pattern over and over again. There's other like psychotherapies are starting to add in body awareness exercise pieces as well. So it's, the talk therapy that people are adding in EMDR or sensory motor therapy or internal family systems or EFT, all of which include a body component. So I'm just really happy to have you here and talk about your modality and how you're helping with the education and the reintegration for folks with the mind-body connection.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank
for having
you.
me.
And if any of our listeners wanted to connect with you, what would be the best way to do that, Fritha?
They could check out my website. It's kind of a mouthful. Feldenkrais and Movement Arts, FELDENKRAIS, and movementarts.com.
Beautiful. We'll
Yeah,
put all
lots
those. Oh, go ahead.
So there's lots of information about classes and workshops and what's happening. So that's probably the best way to go.
Awesome. We'll put all that into the show notes so any of our listeners
Okay.
can partake with that. And as far as I'm aware, your workshops are now national or international, I guess, right? Anyone can join them now. All the loveliness of Zoom.
Yeah. Yep. Most things, pretty much everything's online right now. So it's very exciting to be connecting with people from all over.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So if any of our listeners are interested in connecting with Fritha, taking any of her workshops, or are you able to do one-to-one through Zoom as well?
I am. Yep.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. That's super useful. So yeah, anyone who's interested, reach out to her. We'll have her website information, and you have a Facebook as well, correct?
I do.
Yep. We'll put that into the show notes so you guys can click there and connect with her. So thank you so much again, Fritha. It was a pleasure having you join us.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thanks for doing this.
Of course. And thank you all listeners. We'll talk to all of you again next week.